This week, we are going to talk about meiosis. Now, meiosis is very similar to mitosis, but it is different. Mitosis, which we talked about recently, is cell division, but it's of all of our normal, typical body cells, skin cells, hair cells, bone cells, blood cells, like all the normal cells in your body. Mitosis is every single cell except for one. Meiosis is the cell division of that one, the other cell. Meiosis is the division of our sex cells. So in males, that would be sperm, and in females, that would be eggs. So meiosis is only the division of sex cells. Mitosis is division of every other cell in your body. So we're going to see that some of the functions and some of the mechanisms that occur during each stage are pretty similar, but the difference is the type of cells that are dividing and then how many cells you wind up with in the end. With mitosis, you end up with 2 cells. With meiosis, you end up with 4 cells. They're different kinds of cells, so the results are a little bit different. But let's go ahead and work through this and talk through this and see what's up, see what's the difference, what's going on. First, before we can even talk about meiosis, we need to talk a little bit about chromosomes and chromosome numbers. So all the characteristics that something, that a person or an animal or a plant, like, but let's just kind of think of people for this. All the characteristics such as hair color, eye color, all of these are called traits. And then the instructions for each of these traits, these are located on our chromosomes, which are found in the nucleus of our cells. DNA is organized into these little segments called genes that control the production of a protein, and each chromosome contains hundreds of different genes. So there's this image here in your cell in the nucleus, there's a bunch of chromosomes. Each chromosomes have a bunch of genes. Each genes has a ton of DNA. So all that to say, there's a lot of DNA in your cell. So at some point for organisms, when they start to reproduce, that DNA has to be duplicated and has to be sent off. And we're going to see what happens with that. Now, chromosomes, we tend to use the term homologous. A homologous chromosome means basically they're similar, they're paired up, they're matched. Let's look at humans. Humans have 46 chromosomes, which means there are 23 different pairs. One of the chromosomes from the pair comes from the mother, and one of the chromosomes from the pair comes from the father. So the chromosomes that make up these pairs are called homologous chromosomes. So again, they look alike, they're similar height, they code for the same type of genes, the same type of traits. So that's what homologous chromosomes are, similar chromosomes. Now, homologous chromosomes are the same length, they have the same centromere position, they carry genes for the same traits. This picture does a pretty good job of giving you the idea that one's from the mom, one's from the dad, but they're very similar. Now, when we talk about cells, we also have what are called haploid cells and diploid cells. Now, to maintain the same number of chromosomes from generation to generation, organisms produce their gametes or their sex cells, meaning sperm for males, eggs for females. And each of these gametes has half the number of chromosomes. Now, stop and think about that for a minute. Why would it have half of the chromosomes? Well, if it's going to create a brand new organism, half the chromosomes have to come from the mother and half the chromosomes have to come from the father. So gametes have to have half as many so that when they combine, it has the total normal amount of chromosomes that the organism is going to have. So if we were to use the symbol or the letter N to represent the number of chromosomes in a gamete, a cell with N chromosomes is a haploid, and then a cell that has 2 N chromosomes is a diploid. So again, haploid cells would be our sex cells or our gametes. And then every other cell in your body, hair cells, bone cells, muscle cells, every single other cell are diploid cells. So when you start hearing the terms haploid cells and diploid cells, only gametes or sex cells are what we call haploid cells, and everything else is a diploid cell. So as we start talking about meiosis, we're going to be focused on haploid cells here. Okay, now meiosis, unlike mitosis, mitosis is one cycle. Well, meiosis kind of has two stages before the cycle is complete. We begin with meiosis 1. So meiosis is a type of cell division that reduces the number of chromosomes in a cell and produces gametes. There are two consecutive cell divisions, meiosis 1 and meiosis 2, and they have to go through both of those cycles before the new cells are generated. Okay. You can kind of see the cycle here, but we'll break that down as we go. It begins with interphase, just like mitosis. Interphase is when chromosomes replicate, chromatin condenses. And then we begin meiosis 1 with prophase 1. All the homologous chromosomes pair up. Each chromosome contains two sister chromatids. You can see the chromosomes are kind of pairing up here. As homologous chromosomes condense, they are bound together in a process called synapsis, which allows for this event that we call crossing over. So crossing over is when chromosomal segments are exchanged between a pair of homologous chromosomes, and it produces an exchange of genetic information. So inside of each of us, we have chromosomes from our mother and our father. And when prophase 1 begins to happen, you're going to notice that these different chromosome pairs, these homologous chromosomes, chromosomes that are the same, but one's from mom, one's from dad, they're going to be wound up so tightly that little segments are going to swap places. Now, this is just one example of things that cause our genetic variation. When we have offspring, they don't look like tiny little clones of us. They look similar, they have similar traits, but the reason, this is one of the reasons they're very different, because this crossing over. Now, this occurs before the gametes are even produced. This crossing over happens, making the chromosomes begin genetically variant or different from you, the parent. But prophase 1, crossing over happens. Then we get to metaphase 1. Chromosome centromeres attached to these little spindle fibers, and homologous chromosomes line up as a pair at the equator. Then anaphase 1 happens. The homologous chromosomes are separated and moved to opposite poles of the cell. The chromosome number is reduced from 2n to just n when the homologous chromosomes separate. And then telophase 1 happens, chromosomes reach the opposite poles, and cytokinesis occurs. But this is just the end of meiosis 1. We're going to keep going. Meiosis 2 begins with prophase 2, so a second set of phases begins. The spindle apparatus forms, the chromosomes condense. Metaphase 2 happens, chromosomes are positioned at the equator. Meiosis 2 involves a haploid number of chromosomes. Anaphase 2 begins, and these sister chromatids are pulled apart at the centromere by the spindle fibers and move towards the opposite poles of the cell. And then telophase 2 occurs. The chromosomes reach the poles, the nuclear membrane and nuclei reform, and then finally cytokinesis occurs, creating 4 haploid cells with n number of chromosomes. So at the end, suddenly we have these gamete cells with half of our genetic information. They are haploid cells. They have half of our information. And these are what combined with another person's haploid cells to create a whole new individual with diploid amount of chromosomes. But let's keep going. Meiosis is very important. Mitosis, which we talked about in the past, consists of one cell division that produces identical cells. Okay. Meiosis, which we're talking about today, consists of 2 cell divisions that produce haploid daughter cells that are not genetically identical. So it results in this genetic variation, which makes sense, again, because these cells have to combine with another individual's haploid cells to combine together to make a brand new organism with its own set of genetic information. So that's why the cells result in haploid cells. So during prophase 1, the chromosomes line up randomly at the equator. Gametes end up with different combinations of chromosomes. Genetic variation is produced during crossing over, during fertilization, when gametes randomly combine. So all of these different things are happening, creating huge genetic variation. When you really stop and think about it, the possibility of you being exactly you the way you are, it's kind of astronomical. It's kind of a miracle that, like, there are so many variations that could have happened, and the one that happened is you. So in my opinion, that's pretty cool to think about. Finally here, as we talk about reproduction, meiosis goes with sexual reproduction, but we also have asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction is when an organism inherits all of its chromosomes from a single parent, and the new individual is genetically identical to the parent. So unicellular organisms, amoeba, bacteria, things like that, these little hydras or sweet potatoes, like all of these things are genetically identical to its parent. And when those chromosomes come from a single parent, that is asexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction is when you have two individuals whose gametes combine to create a brand new organism with genetic variation, meaning they're completely different from the parents. That is sexual reproduction. The rate of beneficial mutations is faster. So typically beneficial traits are what's passed on. Beneficial genes multiply faster over time with sexual reproduction than they do for asexual organisms. But again, this is why you are completely different than your parents, even though you may have similar traits. You are genetically different. But that's meiosis. Try to visualize, keep in mind the differences between meiosis and mitosis, which we talked about in the past. Moving forward, this information is going to be helpful on this week's assignment. So if you need to rewatch this video, make sure you do. If you need me, once again, email me. We can set up a Zoom if you need it. Otherwise, email is fine. Ask me any questions you need answers to. And good luck on this week's assignments.